G'day guys, it's John here from the Ohazassu channel, and in today's video I'm going to talk about how the hell I ended up studying Japanese, because it's one of the most frequently asked questions and it's about time I made a video so I can give people a nice, beautiful, shiny URL that they can click on to get the full story. Okay, well, let's begin with where it started. I was 12 years old and I was in year 7 in Sydney, Australia, and our teacher decided to teach us Japanese. That's right, we didn't have a choice. And it turned out to be a whole bunch of fun. Squiggly lines, crazy grammar, and interesting sounding words. We learnt things like konnichiwa, watashi no namae wa John desu, and all that kind of stuff. I remember my first oyaji gag. It was when we learnt how to count. And when we heard the words ichi ni san, me and my friend looked at each other and started scratching our knees. And our teacher, of course, was scratching her head, and we said, "You said ichi ni," while scratching our knees. And that's where it all began. So I studied for about a year in year 7, and that went fine, and I had a good time. And I still remember how we learned hiragana, by the way. Our teacher had these cards, and they had pictures, pictograms, and they would remind you of the pronunciation of that hiragana. For example, I only remember a few of these, by the way, but it's amazing that I remember them at all, because this is going back many, many years. This is going back all the way to 1992. So the one for o, the a, I, u, e, o, was actually like a little drawing of a golf, like a hole, you know, the flag. I don't know what the name of that is in golf terms. I'm not a golf player. I'm not a golfer. So, and it was supposed to plant that association of the O sound in golf. And so that was one of them. Another one was na. And I remember na being a pictogram of a nun kneeling and praying. And I can still remember that. It was like, you know, the bottom part that goes like that. It looks, you can sort of picture someone kneeling. Anyway, there are a couple that I remember, and every single hiragana had one. But that helped us remember the hiragana chart. And I don't think we got into katakana in year 7. But anyway, that's how it all began. And the reason why they were probably teaching us Japanese, or why that teacher chose to teach it that year, was because Australia and Japan had a great relationship, and we still do. And at that time, there used to be a lot of tourists. The tourism industry was crazy big, and a huge chunk of the tourists were Japanese tourists. And so I think everyone was sort of onto like, you know, if you learn Japanese, it's going to be good for your future. It's going to be good for your career. And so everyone started getting into it. And that's how it all began. Then in year 8, that's in 1993, I had to change high school due to some family circumstances. So I was this fresh kid in a brand new school. I had no friends, and it was a really awkward and difficult time for me. But that's a whole different story. So what happened there was they didn't teach Japanese in year 8, they were teaching French. And so I had to learn French that year. And I also enjoyed that quite a bit. And, you know, and that was also interesting. And I just remember a couple of things, and I still remember how to count up to about 10, if that. But that was also nice. But then year 9 came by. Now in year 9, something happens. You have elective subjects. And so you don't actually have to study a language. You can either choose from one of the languages that you've studied, or you can just choose to not study a foreign language at all. And I actually happen to enjoy studying foreign languages, so I had to decide between French and Japanese. And so I went with Japanese, obviously. And the reason why that happened was because it was such a challenge, and it was so interesting to me. You know, and one of those things that makes me think as an adult, I look back at that sometimes when I'm, you know, going through some kind of a challenge or a difficult decision or something that's popped up that's really hard to deal with. I'll look back at that and go, you know what, you should look at young John. Look back at young John and learn from him, because back then I looked at that challenge and I didn't see it as a challenge or a turn-off. I actually saw it as something interesting because it was different. And that made it exciting and interesting for me. It really sort of got my curiosity going, and I just wanted to learn more and more. And as an adult, sometimes, like I get these things where, if something feels too difficult, I don't frame it that way anymore as an adult. And I think that's one of the bad things about growing up, don't you reckon? So like when you're a kid, things look interesting. They don't look difficult. They look interesting or exciting. And sometimes I use that as a way to reframe things as an adult actually as well. So that was a good experience actually, remembering how I ended up choosing Japanese over French. But anyway, that's, going right off track. But I thought I'd throw that in there because it's sometimes a good thing, looking back at your old self, at your younger years, to learn from the way that you used to approach things. Anyway, so that's how I ended up choosing Japanese for year 9. My teacher in year 9, by the way, was a fantastic guy. He was just very, very passionate about how he taught Japanese. Every lesson used to start with him writing the date in kanji on the board, and we were in the Heisei era. So he'd write Heisei and the year and the month and the day, and that's how our lesson would begin. He was so passionate about how, he would teach and go into detail with every time he taught a kanji or something like that. It was I think he's probably one of the biggest reasons why I developed such a passion for Japanese, looking back. And so we had him in year 9. And so that was great. And we were studying this textbook called, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think it was called Kimono. And it was just a basic textbook with a cartoon kind of a layout, like a comic layout, and very similar to any kind of language textbook. A little story, speech bubbles, a little vocab list at the end, a couple of grammar points, and that's it. Very simple, but very effective. And I think that's one thing that actually comes up with language learning. People think that they need to do really complex things in order to improve. And I don't think that's actually the case. I think it's just a matter of doing simple things, but consistently and over a long period of time. And because if there's too much, your brain can just overload and nothing will end up going in. So I have a lot of opinions about what works best, but that I can only speak for myself. I have given advice to a lot of people out there in the past, and it has worked for some of them. But the thing is with learning that you need to find a way that works for you. Everyone has a slightly different way, like a preferred way of learning, a learning style. And so it's important to recognize or discover. I will actually say discovering is very important, because if someone tells you this is how, this is the best way for you to learn, it's not always the case. And sometimes it can actually turn you off and it can demotivate you, in my experience anyway. So it's important as a learner to discover what works best for you and to stick with that and to fine tune it so that you get the most out of your learning. But anyway, so where was I? Oh, yes. So with year 9, that's what happened. We had that fantastic teacher. Unfortunately, he had to move schools the following year. I'm not sure what happened. I think he just moved to a different location, or perhaps they needed him somewhere else. But he was a fantastic teacher, and I'm so glad that I had him, even if it was just for a year. The next year we had another teacher who wasn't as passionate as he was, but she was still very good. And we just followed the textbook and we learned what we had to learn for the curriculum. And that was okay. It wasn't too bad. Year 11, that's where things get interesting. So at this point, I knew that I wanted to pursue the Japanese language for my higher school certificate, which is the final qualification for our high school in Australia. And that sort of determines where you're going to go with your university studies and, that kind of stuff. So it's quite important, the subjects that you choose are they have an impact on your future and on your career. I guess you could safely say that for most people. Obviously, it's not the end of the world. You can change course later on, but it sets the course in most cases. And so I wanted to study Japanese for years 11 and 12, but something really bad happened. No one else in my year wanted to go with Japanese after year 10. Everyone was like, yeah, I'm not going to do it anymore. And so I was literally the only guy left out of, I think we had about 5 or 6 students in year 10. And in year 11, everyone was like, nah, not doing it. And so for me, that was a bit devastating. I thought, that's it, it's the end. I can't keep studying Japanese at school, and I'm not going to be able to do it for my HSC. But I had a really great teacher, and he looked into, I think it was either my head teacher or the careers advisor at our school. I can't remember which one it was. But he looked into what was available, and he found out that there was something called the Saturday School of Community Languages. I think that's what it was called. I'll look it up, and if I find it, I'll put the title up here on the screen as well for you, just in case there are any other people out there now watching this in Australia. There's this system available. I hope it's still available because it saved me back then. And so what happens with this system is that you go to, obviously, Saturday school, and they teach you based on the curriculum. And this fully counts towards your HSC as a official subject. And it means that you get those periods off during the week. So where you would have done Japanese between Monday and Friday, you get those periods off, and then you have to go to Saturday school for like 3 or 4 hours every Saturday. Now, as you can imagine, all of the people there are really, really motivated because they're there by choice, okay? And if you think about it, who wants to give up 3 or 4 hours every Saturday? It's a big chunk of your weekend for 2 years. The only upside to it is that you get that amount of time off during the week. But for most people, it's not worth the trade-off, right? So that's what I went with. And it was even a bit of a trek for me. I had to travel about an hour each way by public transport to get to this place. It was in Chatswood in Sydney. If you're familiar with Sydney, it was in a place called Chatswood. And for me, that was about an hour each way by bus and train. And so I had to do that every week, every Saturday for 2 years, for year 11 and 12. But it was fantastic. I was surrounded by motivated students, and we had native Japanese teachers. And that was actually the first time that I got to speak to native Japanese people or meet Japanese people and actually speak to them and practice Japanese and learn from them. And the other great thing was, being able to ask anything, any question, and being very confident in the answers that you got. It was just a fantastic opportunity and experience. And so that was something quite miraculous that happened to me. So I felt very lucky that I was able to continue in year 11 and 12. And during that time, we studied probably about 300 to 400 kanji. We would practice speaking, we would practice writing. We were given a couple of chapters from a couple of different books that we had to study. Teachers would ask us questions in Japanese. And overall, it was just a fantastic experience. But this is, something I want to talk about. Simply learning from textbooks and from teachers, even for that long period of time. So I had done it, by the end of year 12, I had done year 7, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's 5 years in school. But I'll be honest, those 5 years could probably be covered by an eager adult, a motivated adult could learn all of that in probably about 1 to 2 years if you put your head down and studied it very seriously. I'd say, to be generous, let's say 2 years, okay? In 2 years, you'd be able to cover what I covered in 5 years at school, okay, from year 7 to 12. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that it's not just about how hard you study from the textbooks and from teachers. Without actually using it, without being in an environment where you're using the language, you can only go so far, okay? Obviously, you can learn a lot, but in terms of fluency and how easily you can access what's in your brain, how quickly you can access the stuff, and how effectively you can communicate, I think there's a limit to it. There certainly was in my case. So in year 12, I actually put my mind to it, and I wanted to find a job where I could use my Japanese. I mean, I needed money, so I had to work anyway. So I was looking for a part-time job that I could do during my final year of high school. And I thought, wait a second, I could kill two birds with one stone. I could work in a place where I can use my Japanese language skills, even though they were quite limited. I thought, surely it's enough to sort of, get by and do basic customer service. And so I started looking into my options. And at the time, there used to be 3 or 4 really large duty-free stores in Sydney, Australia. And like I mentioned, a lot of tourism came from Japan. So we had a lot of Japanese tourists at the time. Although in the late 90s, it started decreasing. But when I was in year 12, it was still kind of okay. So I started applying. And one of the places that happened to be one of the biggest places, they got back to me and they asked me to come in for an interview. So I went, and I was over the moon. I was this 17-year-old kid, not a clue. I had no idea what the hell I was doing, but I just knew that I wanted an opportunity to use my Japanese. And so they got in touch with me and I went, and I was nervous as hell. I was just like, what am I doing here? What am I going to do, And I was nervous enough just in English. And then on top of all that, I had to freak out and stress out about being asked something in Japanese. And during the interview, of course, they asked me to introduce myself in Japanese, and they asked a couple of questions, and they just wanted to see how much I could speak. And I had no idea if I had passed. I was like, obviously as a 17, 18-year-old, I was very inexperienced with job interviews. This was like literally my second job. And so I had no idea. I couldn't read the situation very well. And a couple of weeks later, I got a letter and I was accepted. And they said, come on in, you have training. You've got to come and you've got to train. And I was over the moon. I was like, this is probably one of the best opportunities ever. And over there, I was able to practice and use my Japanese in a real situation. And that's where I started feeling like, wow, now I can really feel it improving, and I can really feel that I'm going to get somewhere with this. And that's also where I made a couple of friends. And it's the reason why I ended up in Osaka on a working holiday visa the following year. So year 12 ended. I went really well, by the way, in my tests and all that, thanks to my teachers and my fantastic classmates at the time who, like I said, were very highly motivated people. And I think we helped each other in that way to perform really well. So once that was over, I went to Osaka on a working holiday visa because one of the people that I met at the duty-free store, he was from there, and he would jokingly tell me, if you go to Japan and you don't go to Osaka, I'm never going to talk to you ever again. And he was joking, obviously, but because of him, I ended up going to Osaka, and he introduced me to his family, and a friend of his was actually running a construction company. And that's why I ended up in, believe it or not, the construction company as a labourer. That's what I was doing on my working holiday when I first got here in Japan. And so that was probably where I really, I would say, if any one thing made me fluent in Japanese, it was that experience. But without the foundations, without learning the grammar and the vocab and the basic sort of kanji before that, I honestly can't say how much I would have improved in such a short time. But my guess would be that I don't think I would have improved that much. So if I were to give my personal advice, and I know this doesn't apply to everyone, so feel free to take it or leave it, but if you have the option and you only have a limited time in Japan, learn as much as you can before you get here, and so that you have a really good foundation to work with. Because as soon as you start hearing stuff in real situations, your brain's going to start putting two and two together. It's like when you first start learning, all that vocab and the grammar structures that you learn through textbooks, they're kind of like, I think I just said you can put two and two together. So it's like all those pieces, they're like twos floating around, and you don't know what to do with them. You don't know that they can equal four, but you know them. You know there's a two here, there's a two here, there's a two here, but you just can't put it together. Not very quickly either. Even if you can, you can't do it very well. So what happens is, if you don't have the twos and you're starting with nothing and you come here, you're going to be spending a lot of time trying to learn the twos. And then once you learn the twos, you're going to start learning how to put them together. But if you learn the twos, which is actually pretty easy to do if you've got a year or two, you can learn those. And then once you get here, you very quickly start learning how to put it all together. And it makes the process a lot faster and a lot more. I think it was, like, for me, it was just really smooth and it was a lot of fun. So again, it's just my experience, and I know it doesn't apply to everyone and everything, but that's what I think really helped me in my particular situation, was that I had a great foundation, and being fully immersed in the language when I got here really, really helped. And so obviously on a construction site, you can imagine it's very rough. And it was also in Osaka Ben, the Osaka dialect. So I couldn't understand a word. The first thing that I was, they yelled at me was, "Oi, tonkachi totte koi ya." And I had no idea what the hell was going on. I don't know what tonkachi meant. I didn't know what totte koi ya meant. And it was crazy. Like every day people would be screaming at me, getting angry at me, and I'd just be laughing from the frustration, and they'd get even angrier and they'd be like, "Why the hell are you laughing?" And I very quickly learnt what a tonkachi meant, and it means a hammer, like bring the damn hammer, kind of thing. And so I learnt all these words, and it was a bloody amazing experience. Lots of frustration, lots of really hard times, to be honest. But I think it's because of that. It's sometimes the more you suffer and the more sort of challenge there is in learning something, the better it sticks. And I think that was really the case for me. So I'm really grateful that I had that opportunity, that experience. And within about 2 to 3 months, I was able to understand and use Osaka Ben, and it was a very, very fast improvement. And so that's my experience basically with Japanese, and how I learnt and how I started learning. Oh, and by the way, after that job, I only was in that labouring job for about a few months. It was like 3 months or something. And after that, I worked in a little, like a izakaya, like a restaurant, making food in the kitchen and stuff. And that was also lots of fun. And I learned a lot of funny things over there as well. But yeah, that's basically my story. And I just wanted to share it with you guys. And I'd love to hear your stories as well. Let me know in the comments if you've got a unique story about how you ended up learning Japanese or getting into the whole Japan thing. I'd love to hear about it, because I know all of us have really interesting stories, and every time I make a friend or get to talk to someone, I love hearing about everyone's story, because everyone's got such a different story, and they're always interesting and unique. So let me know, if you've got some interesting stories you want to share. Now, at the end of this little video, one thing I really wanted to do as well is to share a couple of my personal tips and advice that really helped me throughout my language journey, and things that I still do. And I mean, I use Japanese on a very regular basis for my work. I do translation and a bit of interpreting and stuff, and bilingual project support, all kinds of things. When you can speak the language, it opens up a lot of doors. And so the topic sometimes comes up, like, is it worth learning Japanese? Should you know Japanese if you live in Japan? My answer to that is of course. Of course you have to know Japanese. I don't really think you can expect a lot from living here if you can't speak the language. And you don't have to be perfect. Even though I've been studying for a while, or I don't really study that much now, but even though I studied for a while and I can speak it to a fairly, decent degree, I still wouldn't call myself perfect. I'm far from perfect. There are sometimes there are topics that come up that where I stumble all over the place and I don't follow at all. So it's hard to reach perfection. I mean, what is perfection anyway? I mean, I'm not even perfect in English. So it's kind of unrealistic to expect yourself to become perfect in a language in the first place. So yeah, I have a lot of opinions about that as well, which I'd love to talk about in future videos. What is fluency? What is bilingualism? What is, how much is enough? How good do you have to be? What is this obsession that people have with native level? It's, yeah, future videos. Keep an eye out and stay tuned. But yeah, so my advice, I have a couple of very basic things. And this video is getting a bit too long. I'm just looking at the time. I don't want to go too overboard, and I'll probably elaborate on some of these in future videos. But one of the things that I found really helpful was recording my own voice. So I would record myself saying something and I'd play it back, and the first recording would sound horrible or pretty bad, and I'd do it again. And I noticed that if I did it about 4 or 5 times, I'd get a lot smoother and a lot better at saying it. It would just start rolling off my tongue. And so I started doing this for everything. Every new sentence pattern that I learnt, I would just do this. I would record myself, listen to myself, record myself, listen to myself, and I'd get better each time. And if you just do that, and each week or whatever, you just write a paragraph or you write a couple of sentences, say it and listen to yourself, you can tell, that sounds a bit off, or I'm not saying it clearly, or I'm not saying it smoothly, and you can improve. You can just give yourself feedback and improve. The other thing that I used to do was make handwritten flashcards. And I think these days, we have electronic flashcards like Anki Decks and all kinds of fancy apps that do everything for us. Just my personal take, but the easier something is, I think the less effective it is when it comes to learning. If it's hard and it uses all your senses, like your writing and your reading and your looking things up. I've made a video in the past about using a paper dictionary to look up kanji. I think engaging the senses is key. So using your fingers to look through pages, that's engaging your sense of touch. Looking visually through lists, it's engaging your eyesight much more than just staring at a blank, or not a blank, but just staring at a phone screen without actively kind of searching for information. It's a very different thing. So I used to make handwritten flashcards and throw them into a bowl and randomly pull them out. And if one side was Japanese, I'd have to say the English and vice versa. And so that made my brain quite flexible, and I would never know which one was going to come next, which word's coming next and which language. And I'd do these every day. And it would just take, I don't know, about 20 or 30 minutes a day to get through a couple of 100 cards or whatever it was. This is a very long time ago, but I would just do that every day. And within about a couple of months, I learnt large lists of words this way, and it was very effective for me. They're my 2 big ones. One quick book recommendation before I go. I think my battery and my memory is going to finish, so I'll wrap it up. But another thing that I did was I used this book that's called Japanese Verbs. And I still use this book as a reference sometimes because it has a fantastic introduction about how to use honorifics and humble language in Japanese, keigo and all that kind of stuff. And the way that the verbs are presented and the way that they include sample sentences using the verb in various forms it really helps you to fully understand how they work and when certain verb forms are used. And I just thought that book, for some reason, it just clicked with me. Earlier, I was talking about how it's about discovery, finding what works for you. And it took me a few years to find that book, you know, and so you've really got to keep at it. You've got to keep looking for different things. And one day it'll just click. You'll see something and you'll go, now I get it, you know, and you might not get that for a little while. So make sure you keep looking and make sure you stick with it. Anyway, that's all from me for this video. I hope you found some value in it. And if you did, please don't be shy. Make sure you click on that like button and subscribe to my channel for more. I'll see you at the next video. Bye for now. Oh, I almost forgot. At the end of these videos, I always include something called Word of the Day. And today's Word of the Day is something called wahori. Wahori is actually just short for the word working holiday. And that's the visa that I used to come to Japan for the first time all the way back in 1998. Anyway, thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you at the next video. And speaking of the next video, it's going to be about 2 very powerful ways in which knowing the Japanese language has helped me with my life here in Japan. One of them has to do with a very serious medical issue which happened to me about 10 years ago. And the other one is to do with family and something really nice and heartwarming. And that's all from me for today. Bye for now.